Okay, so I'm going to record a video because I don't know how to record audio on its own. This may take a minute, and I realized when I first started recording a video, I didn't entirely. Ooh, that's helpful. I didn't have my microphone set up properly, so it did not record sound. So I'm going to quickly sort of figure out how to do that. So I'm going to record over my video pretty much, and and get some narration for it, since I didn't do that the first time. Oh, no. And just as a disclaimer, it might not match up perfectly with the video. And I have other segments where I did just, live, real time, recorded with it. And I think that's how I like to work, honestly. That's been the most enjoyable process for me. However, for the sake of having engaging content throughout the video, I wanted to record, pretty much narrate and walk through the process as I'm watching it again. So I was starting off with the lights here. Yeah, that's what I was doing. So I have a layer for ambient occlusion, which we're not using. I had a layer for the shadows, the lights, and the rim lights. And there are a couple other layers that are, I see concept artists using in their process, but they're all over the place, and I can't think of in that many layers. I like to get the basics down, and I can pretty much do what I need to do with that. And if there's anything else, it's just extra. I don't really have terms for it. But a good start off are the lights, the shadows, and the rim lights. And what I'm doing in this particular piece is starting with the lights. I know a lot of times when drawing, even me in painting, people like to start off with the shadows and the darker values. So you start off shading the piece and getting where the shadows are going to be. One of the things I like to do to switch it up and give a new, interesting way to look at it are painting the lights first. And I think I like painting the lights first because it has this weird thing that it establishes. I think it's easier to establish your actual light source when you're painting the actual lights, and then you can get a even better idea where it's coming from rather than when you're painting the shadows. Because I know sometimes when I'm painting the shadows, I start throwing shadows in generic places rather than thinking about where it's going to be coming from. So I think when I paint the actual lights, I actively have to think, well, where is this light coming from? Because I'm not just doing, generic shadows. Like if you had cast lighting and it wasn't as strong, and the clouds were covering the sun, so lighting is sort of spread out and not really direct, it becomes tougher to read where that lighting is going to be. But you'll always have shadows still, so there's always going to be shadows somewhere, and you may by default refer to those shadows with that are just found in overcast lighting, and it may not be the shadows that you're looking for. They're just sort of default shadows, and you start filling those in, but they're not entirely accurate. So I think starting off with the light gives you a good way of getting your light source without drawing huge arrows on the side of the canvas just to try and figure out where they are. There's nothing wrong with the arrows, but I every time I start with the lights, I sort of been liking the results. So I think it's interesting. Plus, then, in the very beginning, you can play with, well, what color lighting are you going to have and what mood is it going to set? And I think it helps set a good tone for the entirety of the piece. You start tackling that early, and it helps with understanding the emotion that your piece is going to convey. Sorry, gotta drink my smoothie a bit here. Oh man, that's delicious. So yeah, so that's what I'm starting now. I'm getting a little crazy with like the backlighting. You know, the secondary lighting coming from the end. I probably shouldn't have painted that yellow, but I addressed it later on in the piece. And found a solution for that, so I wasn't too worried about it. I ended up noticing it. And I don't know if I mentioned it later, but one of the things I definitely have to commend about Clip Studio Paint, and if I do mention it later, I'll edit this out. But one of the things I definitely have to commend about it are the brushes. You know, not only do they have like a variety of brushes, especially since the whole Clip Studio asset shop opened up, but their brushes have an outrageously good blending tool. I don't think I've used a program that has a blending tool that even compares to Clip Studio Paint. You know, they get close, and they always have like mixers to try and help and get the same effect. But Clip Studio Paint somehow has it all in like just the typical brush tool, and it gets it like perfect. And it just feels very natural and good in the hand, and it flows so smoothly, and it's excellent. It's perfect. You know, I highly recommend Clip Studio Paint, especially if you have more of a feeling for like traditional work or traditional method. I mean, I don't. I mean, I started off traditionally, but you know, I've dipped into digital methods very strongly, especially over the years. But even still, you know, it feels good to just use your stylus and have it doing exactly what you really kind of want it to do. And Photoshop is close to that, especially with some of the brushes they get. But however, it's the way they play with like opacities and like blending. And, you know, so Photoshop has that sort of effect where it's just layering an opacity on top of each other. And it sort of functions like markers if you ever use them. That's sort of how markers are. You know, you just put on layers and layers and it just makes it darker. But, you know, and you can make really good paintings with that, like exceptional paintings with that. But it's not entirely how paint functions. And, you know, even using like any traditional medium, there's still a realm of like blending to it, strangely enough. Like it may have a very small amount, but there is some blending. And it does a good job of just reacting in a way that makes it easy to smooth things out. You don't have to switch to a mixer brush. And that's always annoying. I hated that. I always hate that about Photoshop. Like I don't ever do it actually. I hate using like a separate mixer brush. Like, let me go back in and switch my mixer brush and like blur things together. No, that's annoying. And it's not as bad as the blender, but it still kind of sucks. So yes, I really like, if you get Clip Studio Paint for anything, guaranteed the blending tool. That is like the number one feature of it. I'll probably end up time-lapsing this too, because I don't think I have like too much to talk about. And I was probably rambling on a lot because I just started with the light, and you know, I was playing around with like the colors there with the circle because I wasn't sure about the yellow. I was doing a lot of yellow and purple because I knew the shading was gonna be like a hue of purple, maybe a little close to bluish like indigo, but I knew it was gonna be like, it was gonna have some realm of violet in it. And I do yellow and purple all the time, so I think I was just trying to switch it up, and it didn't work. Like, based on everything that I already established, it was just the theme, and based on the character design, it was honestly the colors that fit really well and fit best probably for the lighting situation. So I just stuck with it, and it is what it is. You know, there's a lot of warm yellow lights, obviously, in real life, whenever you look out in sunlight. And not as much purple shades. I mean, I always use purple shades because purple's, I don't know. I always got to slap some purple on the canvas because I guess it's my favorite color. And, you know, I always feel like an urge to use it. But there's typically like cool colored shades like blues and whatnot. Um, Typical outside. So now I'm just adding on light to the hands. And, geez. I should just time lapse it. So as you can see, I'm using the skin layer as the mask layer. And I think by this point I have everything else colored. I'm just filling in the values right now. And, you know, I don't like to fill in black and white values. You know, I don't like doing that because no matter how I'm going to merge them together in the blending mode, if I have a color, it always makes the colors more interesting. It always makes everything blend in a more interesting manner. And all the values will have more life and personality to them. Even though I can go over them later with a different layer and, you know, utilize, you know, do it in different ways, it's still best to just nip that in the butt right there, because there are plenty of colors that show and reflect and, you know, display light versus plenty of dark colors that will be perfect for values. So I don't think there is like, when you're doing an illustration, there isn't really much of a good reason to use just straight black and white and then try to color over it. It makes it more difficult to get good variety. And I pretty much know this from experience. And even gradient mapping, it doesn't quite yield the same effect. It's not the same. And sometimes, you know, I do gradient map, but it's, you know, you're much better off just starting off with shading and putting in your lights as colors. So now we're getting into the shadows since the lights are done. As I stated earlier, we're going to be doing a little more of a violet, bluish shadows. And some of the biggest reasons for these decisions are especially the background, because you have the yellow hued circle and the dark violet indigo background going on. It unifies everything. You know, the darks in the environment are dark violet and the darks in her are dark violet, so they speak to each other and they interact and, you know, unify. So now people see a pattern of the same color reoccurring, even though there might be different colors going on inside of her and inside of the environment she's around. But just having a few colors that call to each other in both create that sense of unity and that conversation between both of them, and it makes your piece a little more engaging and appealing. So that's why I picked that. I'm making a big mistake at the moment, and what I'm doing is I'm using a really small brush, and I'm focusing in on this tiny area of the hair that's, you know, in the grand scheme is so insignificant. And I don't have anything else done. No, folks, you never do this. You never do this. Never focus on like a tiny piece of hair. Yeah, there we go. I think I just wised up and decided, oh, I need to start using a bigger brush. Yes, you do. I do. Always paint with big brushes first. I don't know why. No, I know why. I know why, because it establishes the important points first. It establishes where your light's going to be very early. It's sort of like laying down the foundation of what your painting is going to do. You're not going to get a bunch of rendered detail or something pretty and everything, but you get a good sense of where the painting is going to go, how the lighting's going to function, how the the shapes of the values are going to interact with each other, what kind of lighting it's going to be. It's like sketching, but with your values, but with paint. So it gets down a rough idea of what's going to happen in a painting early on, and then you can go through and refine it. You can always go through and refine it with your tiny brushes later. But, you know, using the big brushes, you get the idea down first. So once you get to like a different part, you know, they're like completely out of sync because you did it completely wrong and you did the other part this way. So now you got to rechange, you know, switch up the other part. No, you sort of just put in all the rough values at once, and it helps get everything on the same page early. So when you're refining, you're really just refining and not having to go back and work again because one part doesn't match the other. So it helps ease the workflow, essentially. So now I'm going back in and refining, the key points where I think, things get darker, and where you're going to find your darkest darks, and, really pulling out the contrast now. And now we pulled out the small brush, and we're adding that refinement to the overall piece and getting that personality a little bit more. Notice how I'm focusing pretty neatly on those edges, and that was part of the goal with ambient occlusion, is to focus on edges and sort of give them a sense of volume, and not not leave them as like line work, so where they painfully like stand out and they don't blend together. But I think I did it better here. The ambient occlusion layer I did was pretty bad, suckish. So I went back and did it here with the shadows, and it turned out much better. And I think even towards the end, I'll get to that. But yeah, it had a much better effect with the shadows, and I ended up rounding things out, making it more voluminous, if that's the word, than they were before. Blending in those hard edges so they aren't as much hard edges. They aren't as hard of edges, I suppose. And I think that's an important part of the process if you're going for more of a semi-realistic feeling. Because, real things don't have hard edges. Well, hard black edges, that is, most of the time. So sort of rounding that out and having it blend as it comes into the shape, into the object, is very helpful for giving a nice sense of depth. Nice sense of depth. Okay. So I think around here this time I realized there was a significant issue with the hand. Her hand was really long. And because her hand was so long, I decided I was gonna, do my thing. I was gonna do a little magic and show you guys how to fix, significant problems like these. Even though we've gotten significantly far in the process, let's just fix it up and use the free transform tool to just bring the hand down a little bit. Bring the hand and work a little magic so it becomes a little more believable. And I know what you're thinking. Now that we've applied the lights and the shadows, how are we going to still work with a hand like that? We just move the line art completely down, and both the other layers they're completely out of sync. They don't match up. Like, what are we doing? And I think, to be honest, I changed the way I transform that too. But I'll wait till I get there to fully explain it. I'll wait till I get there. Till I get there, There we go. And whenever you transform, you don't have to transform the entire object. You don't always have to transfer the entire object. You can always transfer part of the object. And especially with free transform, you can distort the angle and everything. It's sometimes you only need to transform part of the object. Sometimes one part is just perfect and you just need to grab half of it and just morph it around a bit. I would have liked to show you the mesh transformation tool because it's a little more versatile. It's perfect for those super, super subtle details. But I think this situation only called for a free transform because it just did. It just only called for a free transform. There weren't any points that the transformation wasn't as curvaceous, I suppose, as it needed to be. So when you're dealing with organic objects, very, very organic objects, and you're dealing with like a weird curve or something that's just not hitting right, it is nice to have like a mesh transformation, because then you can start, really messing with the lines on a very, very meticulous level and just curving and shifting things way more than usual, and really tying it together. And I think that's where I stopped this portion of the video. And what was I doing there? What the heck? I think I was showing like an example of free transform, and I was explaining mesh transformations and whatnot. And yeah, I was there we go. See, that's how you can tell. You can control a lot of particular aspects to it and really round things out, really morph it. If you're using a free transform, you're trying to get that perspective right, but it looks wonky. It's like the perspective is technically right, but because the object was flat in a different direction, it just looks like it was transformed. Well, the mesh transformation may be that last little bit nudge that could potentially help you make it feel more organic, to where it's proper and it doesn't feel, transformed in that position. It felt like it could naturally be in that position. But that's what I was showing there. And this is the end of that portion. And I think I called it, I called it to the end of that session. And there's still more to do, because obviously the mask and everything does not match up. But I'm pretty sure I got to that in the next video.